Officer Thomas Wilson patrolled the shores of Lakeside Park every Friday evening without fail. His 20 years on the police force in the small town of Millfield had taught him that routine kept people safe, especially during the busy summer months when the lake attracted so many visitors. The evening sun was setting, painting golden streaks across the water's calm surface. The peaceful scene suddenly changed when Thomas spotted something unusual, a small figure thrashing in the water about 50 yards from shore. His instincts kicked in immediately. Without a second thought, he dropped his radio on the sand, kicked off his boots, and plunged into the chilly water. "Help! Please help!" The desperate cries pushed Thomas to swim faster, his powerful strokes cutting through the water with determination. As he got closer, he could see it was a young girl, probably no more than 10 years old. Her arms flailed wildly as she struggled to keep her head above water. Her fair hair was plastered to her pale face, and her eyes were wide with terror. "I'm coming. Hold on," Thomas called out, pushing himself even harder. Finally reaching the child, Thomas wrapped a strong arm around her small shoulders. "I've got you now. You're safe," he assured her, his voice steady and calm despite his racing heart. "Just relax and let me do the work." The girl stopped struggling, allowing Thomas to swim them both back to shore. The journey back felt much longer, with the added weight and responsibility of the child's life in his hands. By the time they reached the shallow water, a small crowd had gathered on the beach. As they reached the shore, the girl collapsed onto the sand, coughing and spitting up water. Thomas knelt beside her, his police training taking over as he checked her breathing and pulse. She seemed to be recovering well, her color returning to her cheeks. "Are you all right?" he asked, brushing wet hair from her face. "What's your name, love?" The girl took a few more deep breaths before looking up at him. Her eyes, a clear blue, suddenly focused on his face with an intensity that took him by surprise. "Lucy," she whispered, her voice small but steady. "Lucy Wilson." Thomas felt as if the ground had dropped away beneath him. His body went cold despite the warm evening air. Lucy Wilson, his daughter's name. But his Lucy had drowned in this very lake 12 years ago, when she was just 8 years old. He had been working overtime that day, unable to join his family at the lake. By the time he arrived, it was too late. "What did you say?" he asked, his voice barely audible over the murmur of concerned onlookers. "My name is Lucy Wilson," the girl repeated, sitting up now and looking directly into his eyes. There was something in her gaze that seemed far too knowing, too mature for a child her age. Thomas stared at her, taking in her features with growing disbelief. The resemblance was uncanny. The same dimple in her right cheek when she spoke, the same pattern of freckles across her nose that his daughter had. But this was impossible. His Lucy was gone, had been gone for 12 long, painful years. "Where are your parents?" he managed to ask, trying to keep his voice professional despite the emotional storm brewing inside him. The girl's gaze never wavered. "I've been waiting for you," she said softly. "For such a long time." A woman approached them, offering a towel which Thomas automatically wrapped around the shivering child. "Is she all right, Officer Wilson?" "Should we call an ambulance?" the woman asked. Thomas nodded numbly, unable to tear his eyes away from the girl. Who was she? How could she know his name? And why did she claim to be his long-dead daughter? As the sound of approaching sirens filled the air, the girl reached out and took his hand. Her touch was warm and very real. "It wasn't your fault, Dad," she whispered, those 3 simple words cutting straight to the core of the guilt he'd carried for 12 years. Thomas felt his blood run cold as the paramedics approached. No one had ever called him Dad since that terrible day. No one knew how deeply he blamed himself for not being there when his daughter needed him most. Yet somehow, this mysterious child seemed to know exactly what haunted his dreams every night. The E.N.D. Thomas rode in the back of the ambulance with the mysterious girl. His mind raced with questions he couldn't bring himself to ask. The paramedics had wrapped Lucy, or whoever she was, in blankets and were checking her vital signs. She seemed physically fine apart from being cold and tired from her ordeal in the lake. "Blood pressure normal," one paramedic said. "Temperature a bit low, but that's to be expected." Throughout the short journey to Millfield General Hospital, the girl kept her eyes fixed on Thomas. There was something in her gaze that unsettled him, a wisdom that seemed impossibly deep for someone so young. "You look just like I remember," she said quietly when the paramedics were busy with their equipment. Thomas swallowed hard. "I don't understand what's happening here," he admitted in a low voice. "Who are you really?" Before she could answer, the ambulance stopped. The back doors swung open, and they were quickly ushered into the busy emergency department. Dr. Helen Brooks, who had worked at the hospital for as long as Thomas had been on the force, greeted them with a concerned smile. "What have we got here, Thomas?" "Near drowning at the lake," he explained, trying to keep his voice steady. "She seems okay, but she gave you quite a fright, by the look of it," Helen finished for him, noticing his pale face. "Let's get her checked out properly." Thomas waited outside while the doctor examined the girl. The emergency room was quiet for a Friday evening, just a few patients with minor injuries. He paced the corridor, unable to shake the strange feeling that had gripped him since hearing those 3 words at the lake. A nurse approached him after 20 minutes. "Officer Wilson? Dr. Brooks has finished her examination. The girl is asking for you. Has anyone come forward?" Thomas asked. "Any reports of a missing child?" The nurse shook her head. "Not yet. We've contacted social services. They're sending someone over." Thomas hesitated, then followed the nurse to a small room at the end of the corridor. The girl sat on the bed wearing a hospital gown that was too big for her. Her fair hair had been dried and combed, and some color had returned to her cheeks. "Hi," she said simply when she saw him. Thomas remained standing by the door. "The doctor says you're going to be fine." "I know," she nodded. "I wasn't really drowning, you know." This caught Thomas off guard. "What do you mean?" "I saw you struggling in the water." The girl looked down at her hands. "I needed you to find me. It was the only way." Thomas took a cautious step closer. "The only way for what?" "To tell you the truth," she said, looking up again. "About what happened to Lucy, to me, 12 years ago." Thomas felt his heart begin to race. "This isn't possible," he said, more to himself than to her. "My daughter died. I identified her body. We buried her." "I know," the girl said softly. "But there are things you don't know. Things I need to tell you." Before Thomas could respond, Dr. Brooks entered the room carrying a clipboard. "Well, our young patient is doing very well," she announced. "No signs of water in the lungs, no hypothermia. She's a very lucky girl." Thomas nodded absently, his mind still reeling. "Has she told you her full name?" the doctor asked. "We need it for our records." "Lucy Wilson," the girl answered before Thomas could speak. "I'm 10 years old." Dr. Brooks looked from the girl to Thomas with a questioning expression. "Any relation?" Thomas opened his mouth to deny it, but found he couldn't form the words. "He's my dad," the girl said confidently. Dr. Brooks looked confused. "Thomas, I didn't know you had a daughter this age. I thought." She trailed off, clearly remembering the tragedy that had struck the Wilson family years ago. "It's complicated," Thomas managed to say. "Could you give us a moment?" Once they were alone again, Thomas pulled a chair close to the bed. "Please," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Tell me who you really are." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "I told you. I'm Lucy. But I'm not here to haunt you or hurt you. I'm here because you need to know the truth about what happened that day." "What truth?" Thomas asked. "Mom was watching me," she said. "She didn't take her eyes off me for a second. But she got sick, really suddenly. She collapsed on the beach." Thomas felt his chest tighten. "What are you saying? It wasn't your fault, and it wasn't Mom's fault either." "Nobody could have saved me that day." A knock at the door interrupted them. A woman in a neat gray suit entered, introducing herself as Jane from Social Services. "We've been looking into this situation," she said kindly. "And we may have found a match for our young friend here." A family reported their daughter missing yesterday, the Bennetts. They're on their way now. The EMD Thomas felt like he'd been punched in the stomach. The Bennetts? So the girl wasn't Lucy, couldn't be Lucy, but then how did she know so much? The Bennetts, he repeated, trying to keep his voice steady. Jane from Social Services nodded. Yes, they reported their daughter Emma missing yesterday afternoon. She wandered away during a family picnic at Fenton Park. They've been searching for her all night. Thomas looked at the girl Emma, who sat quietly on the hospital bed. Her expression revealed nothing. They should be here in about 20 minutes, Jane continued. They live in Westbridge, the next town over. After Jane left to wait for the Bennetts at the hospital entrance, Thomas closed the door behind her and turned to face the girl. Your name is Emma Bennett, he asked directly. She looked down at her hands folded in her lap. That's what they call me. What does that mean? Thomas pressed, trying to keep the frustration from his voice. Either you are or you aren't. The girl looked up at him, her eyes suddenly much older than her years. I need you to listen carefully, Thomas. I don't have much time now. Hearing her say his name sent another chill through him. How do you know about Lucy? He asked quietly. How do you know about my daughter? Because a part of her is with me, she said simply. I can't explain it in a way that will make sense to you. But I know things. I know that you blame yourself every day. I know that after Lucy died, you and Elizabeth couldn't look at each other without seeing what you'd lost. Thomas felt his legs grow weak. He sat down in the chair beside her bed. That's impossible, he whispered. You keep Lucy's favorite teddy bear in your bedside drawer, she continued. The one with the red bow that's coming loose. You still can't bring yourself to fix it because she was going to help you do it that weekend. Thomas felt the blood drain from his face. He had never told anyone about the bear, not even Elizabeth. The day at the lake, the girl continued, her voice gentle. Elizabeth wasn't just watching Lucy swim. She started feeling very dizzy suddenly. She had the beginnings of the condition that eventually took her life 3 months ago. She collapsed on the beach, and in those few moments. Stop, Thomas said, his voice breaking. Please. You need to hear this, the girl insisted. Elizabeth never told you about her collapse that day because she blamed herself too much. She didn't want you to blame her as well. Thomas shook his head in disbelief. If what you're saying is true, how could you possibly know this? The girl reached out and placed her small hand on his. Her touch was warm, real, and somehow comforting. There are things in this world we don't understand, she said softly. But sometimes, when someone leaves with things unsaid, with love unfinished, they find ways to complete what's left undone. Thomas stared at her hand on his. Are you saying that Lucy somehow? I'm saying that I was sent here with a message, she replied. Elizabeth never blamed you. Not for a single day. And Lucy never felt afraid or alone. She understood, even at the end. Thomas felt tears forming in his eyes for the first time in years. He had locked his grief away so tightly that not even at Elizabeth's funeral 3 months ago had he allowed himself to cry. The message is simple, the girl continued. It wasn't your fault. It was never your fault. And it's time for you to let go of the guilt you've carried for 12 years. A soft knock at the door made them both look up. Dr. Brooks poked her head in. The Bennetts are here, she said. They've identified their daughter from the photo we sent. Thomas nodded, quickly wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. We'll be right there. When Dr. Brooks left, Thomas turned back to the girl. I don't understand any of this, he admitted. She smiled, a small sad smile that seemed too old for her young face. You don't need to understand it. You just need to believe it. And you're really Emma Bennett? He asked one last time. I am Emma, she said carefully. But for a little while, I was also something more. Thomas helped her off the bed, still trying to process everything he'd heard. As they walked toward the door, Emma paused and looked up at him. There's one more thing, she said. Elizabeth left you a letter. Her sister Mary has it. You should call her. Before Thomas could respond, the door opened and a frantic couple rushed in. The woman gave a cry of relief and dropped to her knees, throwing her arms around Emma. "Oh, thank God. Emma! We've been so worried," the woman sobbed, holding the girl tightly. The man, Mr. Bennett, presumably, shook Thomas's hand vigorously. "Officer, we can't thank you enough." When the hospital called, his voice broke with emotion. As the family reunion continued, Thomas stepped back, watching in confusion and wonder. Emma looked over her mother's shoulder at him and gave him a small, knowing smile. The E.N.D. Thomas couldn't sleep that night. He tossed and turned in his bed, the strange events of the day playing over and over in his mind. The girl's words had shaken him to his core. How could Emma Bennett, a complete stranger, know such personal details about his life? About Lucy's teddy bear? About Elizabeth's collapse at the lake that day? Around 3 a.m, Thomas gave up on sleep. He got out of bed and went to his bedside drawer. Inside, carefully wrapped in a soft cloth, was Lucy's teddy bear. The red bow around its neck was indeed coming loose, just as Emma had described. He had never shown the bear to anyone. Had never spoken about his plan to fix it with Lucy that weekend. On impulse, Thomas reached for his phone. It was too early to call anyone, but he could at least look up Mary's number. Elizabeth's sister had moved to Scotland after the funeral, and they had barely kept in touch. To his surprise, there was already a message from her, sent late the previous evening. "Thomas, I hope you're doing well. I was going through some of Elizabeth's things and found something you should see. Can I call you tomorrow?" Thomas stared at the message in disbelief. It was exactly as Emma had said. With trembling fingers, he typed a reply, "I'm awake. Call me anytime." His phone rang less than a minute later. "Thomas? I'm sorry, did I wake you?" Mary's voice was familiar yet distant. "No, I was up," he assured her. "You said you found something?" "Yes, it's a letter from Elizabeth. To you." It was in a box with some old photos, sealed in an envelope with instructions not to open it until after. She paused. Until after she was gone. Thomas felt his heart racing. "What does it say?" "I haven't opened it," Mary said. "But there's something else." Elizabeth kept a diary in her final months. "I found an entry where she mentioned feeling guilty about Lucy's death. She wrote that she'd had some kind of fainting spell at the lake that day, but had never told you about it." Thomas sank into his chair, Emma's words echoing in his mind. "Can you send me a photo of the letter?" he asked quietly. "I'll do better than that," Mary said. "I was planning to visit Millfield next week anyway. I can bring it to you in person." After hanging up, Thomas sat in the darkness of his bedroom until the first light of dawn crept through his curtains. He had spent 12 years blaming himself for not being there when Lucy needed him. Elizabeth had spent those same years blaming herself for looking away, even if just for a moment. They had both carried their guilt in silence, letting it slowly destroy their marriage and their lives. Later that morning, Thomas drove to the hospital. He had no real reason to check on Emma Bennett. Her parents had taken her home the previous night, but he needed answers. Dr. Brooks was on duty when he arrived. "Thomas," she greeted him with a smile. "If you're checking on your drowning victim, the Bennetts took her home last night. She was perfectly fine." "Actually, I wanted to ask you something about her," Thomas said hesitantly. "Did you notice anything unusual?" Dr. Brooks looked at him curiously. "Unusual how?" "I don't know," Thomas admitted. "Anything at all?" The doctor thought for a moment. "Well, she was remarkably calm for a child who'd nearly drowned. And she seemed very present, if that makes sense. Some children her age can be easily distracted, but she was completely focused." She paused. "And there was one odd thing. When I was examining her alone, before you came in, she told me to tell you that Elizabeth understood why you couldn't be there that day." Thomas felt his breath catch. "She said that?" "Yes. I assumed she was confused, mixing you up with her own father perhaps." Dr. Brooks looked at him with concern. "Are you all right, Thomas? You look pale." "I'm fine," he assured her quickly. "Did the Bennetts say anything about her? About where she was before she ended up in the lake?" "Only that she'd wandered away from their picnic at Fenton Park the day before. They'd been searching for her all night." Dr. Brooks frowned. "But Fenton Park is nearly 10 miles from our lake. I'm not sure how she ended up there." Neither was Thomas, and the question troubled him as he drove to the address the hospital had for the Bennett family. He told himself he was just following up, as he would with any rescue, but deep down he knew he was searching for something more. The Bennetts lived in a small, neat house on a quiet street in Westbridge. Mrs. Bennett answered the door, looking surprised to see him. "Officer Wilson," she said. "Is everything all right?" "Yes, everything's fine," Thomas assured her. "I just wanted to check on Emma. It's standard procedure after incidents like this." Mrs. Bennett smiled. "That's very kind. She's in the garden. Please come through." The EMD Thomas followed Mrs. Bennett through the house to the back garden. Emma was sitting on a swing, gently rocking back and forth. She looked up as they approached, and Thomas saw a flash of recognition in her eyes. "Emma, look who's come to check on you," Mrs. Bennett said cheerfully. "It's the police officer who helped you yesterday." "Hello, Officer Wilson," Emma said quietly. "I'll make some tea," Mrs. Bennett offered, heading back inside. When they were alone, Thomas sat on a garden bench near the swing. "How are you feeling today?" he asked. "I'm fine," Emma replied, looking directly at him with that same knowing gaze. "Did you call Mary?" Thomas felt his heart skip a beat. "Yes," he said carefully. "She's coming next week with a letter from Elizabeth." Emma nodded, seeming satisfied. "Good." "Emma," Thomas began hesitantly, "how did you know about the letter?" "About Mary? About Lucy's teddy bear?" The girl stopped swinging and considered his question. "Sometimes," she said slowly, "people who are gone find ways to speak through others. Especially when there's something important left unsaid." "Are you saying that Lucy or Elizabeth somehow spoke through you?" Thomas asked, trying to make sense of it all. Emma shrugged. "I don't remember much about yesterday before the lake. It's like I was in a dream. But I remember feeling that I had to find you. That there was something you needed to hear." Thomas watched her closely. She seemed like a normal 10-year-old girl now, not the mysterious figure from the hospital who had spoken with such wisdom. "Your parents said you wandered away from Fenton Park," Thomas said. "That's 10 miles from where I found you. How did you get to the lake?" Emma looked genuinely puzzled. "I don't know. I remember being at the picnic with Mum and Dad, and then..." She frowned, concentrating. "Then I was in the water, and you were helping me." Mrs. Bennett returned with a tray of tea and biscuits. "Emma's always been a bit different," she said, setting the tray down. "She seems to know things sometimes. Things she shouldn't know." "What do you mean?" Thomas asked. Mrs. Bennett looked at her daughter fondly. "When she was 5, she suddenly started talking about her other mother who got very sick and went to heaven. We thought it was just an imaginary friend, but some of the details..." She shook her head. "Anyway, we've learned to accept that our Emma is special." Thomas sipped his tea, trying to process this information. Could it be possible? Could Emma somehow have connected with Lucy or Elizabeth? "Oh, I nearly forgot," Mrs. Bennett said suddenly. "Emma found something yesterday that she wanted to give to you." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. "We told her she should keep it, but she insisted it was yours." Thomas took the small, smooth stone from Mrs. Bennett's outstretched hand. It had a natural hole right through the center, a wishing stone, Lucy had called them. They had collected dozens together during their walks along the lake. "Thank you," he whispered, closing his fingers around the stone. As Thomas prepared to leave, Emma walked into the front door. "Will you be okay now?" she asked, sounding remarkably adult-like. Thomas knelt down to her level. "I think I will," he said honestly. Thanks to you. Emma smiled, a real, childlike smile this time. Good. That's why I had to find you. A week later, Thomas sat by the lake, reading Elizabeth's letter for the 10th time. Just as Emma had said, Elizabeth had written that she never blamed Thomas for what happened. She explained about her collapse that day, the first symptom of the condition that would eventually take her life. She asked for his forgiveness and expressed hope that someday he would forgive himself too. As the sun began to set, turning the lake water to gold, Thomas felt a presence beside him. For a moment, he thought he caught a glimpse of Lucy sitting there, her little hand in his. But when he turned, there was only the empty bench. Yet he didn't feel alone. For the first time in 12 years, the crushing weight of guilt had lifted from his shoulders. He could breathe again, could remember Lucy with love instead of pain. Thomas stood and walked to the edge of the lake. Carefully, he placed Lucy's teddy bear, its red bow now neatly fixed, on a small homemade raft of twigs. He pushed it gently out onto the water. "Goodbye, my sweet girl," he whispered. "Thank you for sending Emma to me." As the tiny raft floated away, catching the last golden rays of sunlight, Thomas felt a sense of peace wash over him. He knew now that love never truly dies, it just finds new ways to reach us when we need it most. The next day, Thomas walked into the community center and signed up to teach water safety classes for children. The woman at the desk, Alice, smiled warmly at him. "What made you decide to volunteer?" she asked. Thomas touched the wishing stone in his pocket and smiled. "Let's just say I got a message that it was time to start living again." The end.